Montana Territory, 1875. The wind howled like a wounded beast across the snow-blanketed plains, driving ice crystals sharp as needles into any exposed skin. Victoria Jennings stood at her cabin window, staring at the wall of white that had been building steadily since dawn. At 22, she had already known more heartache than most women twice her age, and the oncoming blizzard felt like one more cruelty from a world that had already taken too much. 6 months a widow. The words still felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she'd never wanted to learn. Thomas had been a good husband, not the love of her life perhaps, but steady and kind. His death from pneumonia last spring had left her alone on their small homestead with winter approaching and supplies dwindling. Victoria tucked a strand of honey-blonde hair behind her ear and pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. The small cabin felt cavernous in its emptiness. She had convinced herself that solitude was safer than connection, that if she needed no one, she couldn't be hurt when they were taken away. The frontier was merciless that way, grinding down those who dared to need others. "I don't need anyone," she whispered to herself, a mantra she'd repeated nightly since the day they'd lowered Thomas into the frozen ground. "I can survive this place alone." But the dwindling woodpile and meager supplies in her pantry told a different story. Victoria had been so certain she could manage everything herself, clearing fields, chopping wood, hunting when necessary. Pride, however, wouldn't keep her warm when the firewood ran out. And by her calculations, that would happen long before this storm blew itself out. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the pain. The isolation of frontier life had become both her shield and her prison. She had told herself that loneliness was preferable to loss, had built walls around her heart as sturdy as those of her cabin. But walls couldn't chop wood or hunt game, and determination alone wouldn't see her through a Montana winter. As the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, Victoria made a desperate decision. She would ride to Silver Creek, the nearest settlement, 12 miles away. It was foolish, perhaps suicidal, but the alternative was freezing to death alone in this cabin. Better to die trying than waiting for the inevitable. She had just finished saddling her mare when the snow thickened dramatically, reducing visibility to mere yards. Victoria hesitated, one foot in the stirrup, knowing that to leave now would be madness. But to stay? The sound came faintly at first, the jingle of tack and the muffled thud of hooves pushing through snow. Victoria squinted into the whiteness, her heart pounding. Visitors were rare, even in good weather. In a storm like this, it could only be someone desperate or dangerous. The rider materialized from the swirling snow like an apparition, a tall figure astride a muscular black horse. As he drew closer, Victoria could make out a young man, perhaps 25, with a shock of dark hair visible beneath his snow-dusted hat. His face, partially protected by a woolen scarf, revealed striking blue eyes that widened upon seeing her standing in the barn doorway. "Ma'am," he called, dismounting with fluid grace despite the cold that must have stiffened his limbs. "You weren't planning to ride out in this, were you?" "I was," Victoria admitted, chin raised defiantly. "My supplies won't last through this storm." The stranger unwound his scarf, revealing a handsome face with a day's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. "Name's Luke Garrett, ma'am. I was heading to Silver Creek when the storm worsened. Saw your chimney smoke and hoped I might weather it here." His eyes traveled to her packed saddlebags. "Though it seems you might be in some trouble yourself." "Victoria Jennings," she replied stiffly. "And yes, Mr. Garrett, I'm in a difficult position. My husband died this past spring, and I'm afraid I've miscalculated what I'd need for winter." Something flickered in Luke's eyes. Not pity, which Victoria would have despised, but understanding. He glanced at the sky, then back at her. "Mrs. Jennings, this storm's only getting worse. You'd never make Silver Creek alive." He hesitated, then added, "I've got supplies on my pack horse, food, coffee, extra ammunition. And these hands know how to chop wood. If you'll allow it, I'd like to help you." Victoria stared at him, torn between necessity and the walls she'd built. Accepting help meant acknowledging she couldn't survive alone, that her entire philosophy since Thomas's death was flawed. Yet refusing meant potential death for both of them. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked, suspicion edging her voice. Luke's smile was slight but genuine. "Out here, strangers are just friends we haven't met yet. The frontier takes enough without us refusing to help each other. His words struck something deep within her, a truth she had been fighting since burying her husband. The blizzard wailed outside, making her decision for her. Very well, Mr. Garrett. You may stay until the storm passes. That afternoon, as snow piled against the cabin walls, Victoria watched from the window as Luke chopped wood with powerful, efficient strokes. Despite the biting cold, he had removed his heavy coat, and his shirt clung to broad shoulders as he worked. He had already doubled her woodpile and showed no signs of tiring. It was strange having a man in her space again, particularly one as vital and alive as Luke Garrett. He moved with an easy confidence that spoke of years in the saddle, yet there was a gentleness to him that emerged when he spoke to her or tended to their horses. That evening, they sat before a crackling fire, the cabin warmer than it had been in weeks. Luke had contributed venison jerky and coffee to their meal, transforming Victoria's plain beans into something more satisfying. "How long have you been on your own, Mrs. Jennings?" Luke asked as he cradled a tin cup of coffee between his calloused hands. 6 months, Victoria replied, though it feels longer. She hesitated, then added, "Thomas and I were married 3 years. He was a good man." "I'm sure he was." Luke's gaze was steady. "And you've been managing this place alone since then?" Pride straightened Victoria's spine. "Yes, I've done everything myself." "That's remarkable," he said, no hint of condescension in his tone. "Most men couldn't handle what you've done." "And yet it wasn't enough," she admitted bitterly. "Another week of this storm, and I would have frozen or starved." Luke leaned forward, firelight casting shadows across his features. "Mrs. Jennings, the strongest people I know aren't those who never need help. They're the ones brave enough to accept it when necessary." Victoria looked away, uncomfortable with how his words seemed to penetrate the armor she'd built. "And what about you, Mr. Garrett? What brings you through these parts in winter?" A shadow crossed his face. "I ranch with my brother near Helena. Was delivering horses to Fort Benson when the buyer tried cheating us. I'm heading back now, though this storm had other ideas." There was more to his story. Victoria could sense it, but she didn't press. Everyone on the frontier carried secrets, burdens they weren't eager to share. As they prepared for sleep, Victoria insisted Luke take the bed while she made a pallet near the fire. He protested vigorously until she reminded him whose home he was in, which brought a reluctant smile to his face. "You're a stubborn woman, Mrs. Jennings." "So I've been told, Mr. Garrett." The blizzard strengthened overnight, shrieking around the cabin's corners and driving snow through the smallest cracks. Victoria woke to find Luke already up, stoking the fire and brewing coffee. In the pale morning light, she noticed things about him she'd missed yesterday. A small scar above his right eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled. "Storm's still fierce," he said, handing her a steaming cup. "I'm afraid you're stuck with me another day at least." "I suppose there are worse fates," Victoria replied, surprising herself with the teasing note in her voice. That day established a pattern that would continue through the next week as the blizzard raged unabated. Luke chopped wood and tended the animals while Victoria cooked and mended. In the evenings, they talked by the fire, sharing stories of their lives. Victoria learned Luke had been ranching since 16, that he could play the harmonica, though he refused to demonstrate, and that he had a gift for storytelling that frequently made her laugh despite herself. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved as he spoke, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. On the third night, as wind rattled the shutters, Luke asked about her life before Montana. "I grew up in Pennsylvania," Victoria said, surprised at how easily the words came. She rarely spoke of her past. "My father was a schoolteacher. He believed girls should be educated the same as boys, so I read everything I could find." "Is that how you met your husband?" Victoria smiled faintly. "No. Thomas was passing through with a cattle drive. He courted me for 2 weeks, then proposed before heading west. 6 months later, I joined him here as his wife." "You must have loved him very much to leave everything behind." The observation hung in the air. Victoria stared into the fire, confronting a truth she'd never spoken aloud. "I love the idea of him," she admitted softly, "of adventure and open skies. Thomas was kind and steady, but—" She trailed off. "But not the great love you imagined," Luke finished gently. Victoria nodded, guilt washing through her. "Is that terrible? To say such a thing when he's gone?" No, Luke said. Truth is never terrible, just sometimes painful. On the 5th day, the story of how Luke got the scar above his eyebrow emerged, involving a stubborn mule, his equally stubborn brother, and a bet gone wrong. Victoria laughed until tears came to her eyes, a sensation so foreign it startled her. When had she last truly laughed? That night, as they washed dishes side by side, their hands brushed beneath the water. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks as Luke's fingers lingered against hers for just a moment too long. I should check the horses, he said abruptly, drying his hands and heading outside before Victoria could respond. When he returned, something had shifted between them, a tension, unspoken but undeniable. They sat before the fire as usual, but the comfortable silence of previous evenings had transformed into something charged with possibility. Tell me about your dreams, Luke said suddenly. Before life brought you here. Victoria considered the question. I wanted to teach, like my father, and travel, see the ocean, the mountains. She smiled ruefully. Well, I've seen mountains at least. And now? What do you dream of now? The question pierced something deep within her. What did she dream of? Since Thomas's death, she had focused only on survival, on proving she needed no one. I don't know anymore, she admitted. For months, I've just been trying to endure. Luke's eyes reflected the firelight as he studied her. Perhaps that's the hardest part of loss, finding new dreams afterward. On the 7th day, the storm finally began to abate. Victoria felt a curious mix of relief and disappointment as she watched the sky gradually clear. Luke would leave soon, returning to his life, and she would be alone again. The thought pressed against her chest like a physical weight. That afternoon, Luke announced he would hunt, their supplies dwindling after a week's confinement. Victoria watched him prepare, efficient and focused. Be careful, she said as he checked his rifle. He looked up, a half-smile playing on his lips. Worried about me, Mrs. Jennings? It would be inconvenient to have to bury another man on my property, she retorted, but there was no heat in her words. Luke's expression softened. I'll be back before dark. True to his word, he returned as the sun was setting, a fat rabbit slung over his shoulder. As he approached the cabin, Victoria realized how anxiously she had been watching for him, how her heart lightened at the sight of his tall figure trudging through the snow. That night, as they enjoyed fresh meat for the first time in days, Luke cleared his throat. I should be able to leave tomorrow, he said, not meeting her eyes. The trail to Silver Creek should be passable. Victoria nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite the hollow feeling expanding inside her. Of course, you've been delayed long enough. Before I go, I'd like to split enough wood to last you through winter, he continued, and perhaps help repair that loose shutter. That's not necessary, Victoria began, but Luke cut her off. It is to me. Their eyes met across the table, and Victoria saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch, a yearning that mirrored her own. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Luke worked tirelessly, splitting enough wood to last months and repairing not just the shutter, but several other small issues around the homestead. Victoria watched him from the doorway, memorizing the way he moved, the sound of his voice, preparing herself for solitude once more. As the sun began its descent, Luke finally prepared to leave. He saddled his horse slowly, checking and rechecking straps with unusual thoroughness. Victoria stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself against more than just the cold. Well, Mrs. Jennings, Luke said finally, turning to face her. I suppose this is goodbye. It seems so, Victoria replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Thank you for your help, Mr. Garrett. Luke took a step toward her, then stopped, conflict visible on his face. Victoria, he said, using her given name for the first time. Whatever he meant to say was cut off by the distant sound of hoofbeats. They both turned to see 3 riders approaching, hard-faced men whose posture spoke of trouble. Luke's expression hardened instantly. He moved to stand slightly in front of Victoria, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. Get inside, he said quietly. Who are they? Victoria asked, not moving. Men I hoped never to see again, Luke replied grimly. Please, Victoria. Inside, but it was too late. The riders had reached them, spreading out in a semicircle that blocked the path to the cabin. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, smiled without humor. Well, if it ain't Luke Garrett, he drawled. Fancy meeting you here. Decker, Luke acknowledged, his voice flat. You're a long way from Helena. Been tracking you since Fort Benson, Decker replied. You caused quite a stir, killing Jenkins like that. Victoria felt her blood turn to ice. Killing? She looked at Luke, whose face had gone hard as stone. Jenkins drew first, Luke said tightly. Sheriff ruled it self-defense. Decker spat into the snow. Jenkins was my cousin, and self-defense or not, I aim to settle the score. His gaze shifted to Victoria. Unless you'd prefer we take payment another way. Luke's gun cleared its holster faster than Victoria could blink. You won't touch her, he said, voice deadly quiet. This is between us, Decker. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Victoria's mind raced. The man before her, the gentle, laughing Luke who had chopped her wood and told her stories by the fire, had killed a man. Yet instead of fear, she felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. This is my property, she said clearly, stepping up beside Luke. And you're trespassing. Decker's eyes narrowed. Brave little widow, ain't she? What did you tell her, Garrett? That you're some honest rancher? Did you mention the men you've put in the ground? Only those who needed putting there. Luke replied evenly, his aim never wavering. Victoria's heart pounded. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. 3 armed men against Luke and herself. She had a rifle in the cabin, but it might as well have been in Silver Creek for all the good it did her now. I'm leaving, Luke said to Decker. And you're going to let me. Unless you want to explain 3 more bodies to the territorial marshal. Decker sneered. You think you can take all of us? I know I can take you, Luke replied. The question is whether your boys are willing to die for your vendetta. Something in Luke's voice, the absolute certainty, made the other riders shift uncomfortably. Victoria could see doubt creeping into their expressions. These were not men willing to die for principle. This ain't over, Garrett, Decker growled. It is for today, Luke said. Without taking his eyes off the men, he added, Victoria, go inside. This time she obeyed, backing slowly toward the cabin. Once inside, she grabbed her rifle and positioned herself at the window, ready to provide covering fire if needed. Long minutes passed as the men stared each other down. Finally, with a curse, Decker wheeled his horse around. You can't watch your back forever, he called as they rode away. Only when the riders were distant specks did Luke holster his weapon and turn toward the cabin. Victoria met him at the door, rifle still in hand. You killed a man, she said. It wasn't a question. Luke's shoulders sagged slightly. Yes, Jenkins was a cattle thief. He tried to rob me at Fort Benson, drew on me when I caught him. I didn't have a choice. And the others Decker mentioned? Luke's eyes met hers, unflinching. 2. Both in self-defense. I don't look for trouble, Victoria, but I won't run from it either. Victoria studied him. This man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, yet clearly had a past more complicated than she'd imagined. Were you going to tell me? She asked quietly. Yes, Luke said. I was about to when they arrived. I wanted. He trailed off, looking away. Wanted what? Luke ran a hand through his hair in frustration. To ask if I could call on you properly. To see if what I've been feeling this past week is something you might feel too. He laughed without humor. But now you know the truth. I've killed men. I've got enemies. The last thing you need is more danger in your life. Victoria set her rifle aside. A week ago, she would have agreed with him. The frontier had already taken one husband. Why risk her heart again, especially with a man who attracted trouble? But the past week had changed something fundamental within her. Luke had shown her that needing others wasn't weakness. That connection, even with its risks, was worth the potential pain. Do you know what I realized this week? She said, taking a step toward him. That surviving isn't the same as living. That I've been so afraid of loss I stopped reaching for anything at all. Hope flickered in Luke's eyes. Victoria, let me finish, she said gently. I've learned that the frontier doesn't care if we face it alone or together. It takes what it wants regardless. But facing it together. She took another step closer. That might make it worthwhile. I have to leave, Luke said, though she could see the conflict in his face. Decker won't give up. If I stay, I put you in danger. I'm already in danger, Victoria replied. Every day on this frontier is a risk. At least with you. I wouldn't be alone in facing it. Luke's hands came up to cradle her face, his touch infinitely gentle. Victoria, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that I don't want to just survive anymore, she whispered. I want to live. And somehow, in just 1 week, You've become part of what living means to me." The kiss, when it came, felt like finally coming home after a long, cold journey. Victoria melted into Luke's embrace, feeling the solid strength of him. The promise of safety, not because he would shield her from all harm, but because they would face whatever came together. When they finally parted, Luke pressed his forehead to hers. "I can't stay," he said regretfully. "Not with Decker out there. But I can't leave you unprotected either." Victoria considered for a moment, then made a decision that would alter the course of her life. "Then take me with you." Luke's eyes widened. "What? Take me with you?" she repeated, more certain with each word. "This homestead holds nothing but memories of survival. I want more than that now. Victoria, my life isn't simple. My brother and I, our ranch is just getting established. And there's men like Decker." "I'm not asking for simple," she interrupted. "I'm asking for real. For a chance to build something meaningful, even with all the risks." Luke searched her face, perhaps looking for doubt. Finding none, he smiled, the full, uninhibited smile she had come to treasure. "Are you sure?" he asked. In answer, Victoria kissed him again, pouring into it all the certainty she felt. When they separated, both breathless, she said, "I've never been more sure of anything." The next morning found them packing Victoria's belongings. Not everything, just what mattered most, and what they could carry. Her husband's clothing she left for the next family who might need the cabin. His tools she packed, knowing they would be useful in her new life. As they prepared the horses, Victoria took one last look at the homestead. For 6 months, it had been her prison and her fortress, the place where she had convinced herself that isolation was safer than connection. "Ready?" Luke asked, offering his hand. Victoria took it, feeling the perfect fit of his fingers between hers. "Ready." They rode out as the sun climbed in the sky, Victoria on her mare and Luke on his black gelding. The snow sparkled around them, pristine and beautiful rather than threatening as it had seemed just days ago. "It's a 3-day ride to my ranch," Luke said as they crested a hill. "My brother Daniel will be surprised, but he's a good man. You'll like him. Tell me about your home," Victoria requested, wanting to picture the place that would soon be hers as well. Luke's face softened. "It's in a valley with a creek running through it. Good water, good grass. The cabin's not much yet, 2 rooms, but we're adding on. The herd's small but growing." He glanced at her. "It's not fancy, but it's got potential." "Like us," Victoria said softly. They made camp that night in a sheltered grove. As they sat before the fire, Luke's arm around her shoulders, Victoria marveled at how quickly life could change. A week ago, she had been a widow facing death alone in a blizzard. Now she was riding toward a new life with a man who had awakened feelings she'd never known she was capable of experiencing. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, his breath warm against her hair. "That I never expected any of this," she admitted. "A week ago, I believed I was better off alone." Luke's arms tightened around her. "And now?" Victoria turned in his embrace to face him. "Now I know better." She touched his face gently. "You showed me there's more to life than just surviving, Luke." His kiss was tender, a promise of all the days to come. When they separated, Luke reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver ring. "This was my mother's," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I've carried it since she died, waiting for." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Victoria's heart swelled. "Waiting for what?" "For the right woman," he finished. "For someone as strong and brave and beautiful as she was." He took Victoria's hand. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a week. But out here, life doesn't always give us the luxury of time." "No," Victoria agreed, tears pricking her eyes. "It doesn't." "Victoria Jennings, will you marry me?" Luke asked, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Will you build a life with me, face whatever comes together?" The answer formed itself without hesitation. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her all along. 2 days later, they crested a final hill to reveal a valley spread below them, a silver ribbon of creek winding through it. In the distance, Victoria could make out a sturdy cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, cattle dotting the surrounding pastures. "Home," Luke said simply, his face alight with pride and happiness. As they rode down toward the ranch, a tall man emerged from the cabin. "Daniel," Victoria presumed. He shaded his eyes, then waved enthusiastically when he recognized his brother. Their arrival was a flurry of introductions and explanations. Daniel's initial surprise quickly gave way to genuine pleasure as Luke explained all that had happened. By evening, Victoria found herself welcomed into the Garrett family as if she had always belonged there. That night, as she and Luke stood on the porch looking out at the stars scattered across the vast Montana sky, Victoria felt a peace she had never known before. The frontier was still harsh, still dangerous, but facing it with Luke made all the difference. "Are you happy?" Luke asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind. Victoria leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "Good," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." Victoria turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "Do you remember what you said when you found me trying to leave in that blizzard? That strangers are just friends we haven't met yet?" Luke nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "You were right," Victoria said softly. "But sometimes they're even more than that. Sometimes they're the love we've been waiting for without even knowing it." 3 months later, Victoria stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching as Luke and Daniel worked with the spring calves. Her simple wedding band caught the sunlight, gleaming against her skin. They had married in Silver Creek just a month after her arrival, a small ceremony attended by the handful of neighbors scattered across the nearby valleys. Life wasn't perfect. There had been hardships already, including a tense confrontation with Decker that had ended with the man finally backing down when faced with not just Luke, but Daniel and 2 neighboring ranchers who had come to stand with the Garretts. The frontier would always present challenges, always demand its due. But Victoria no longer faced those challenges alone. Each night, she fell asleep in Luke's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would weather it together. Her false belief that isolation was safer than connection had been thoroughly disproven. In its place was a truth she held close: that love, even on the untamed frontier, was worth every risk. As if sensing her thoughts, Luke looked up from his work and smiled, a smile meant only for her. Victoria returned it, her heart full. "You were right," she whispered, though he was too far away to hear. "I'll never be cold again."